What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJobProjects.com, and we got another live stream for you. Today, we're going to be talking about on-the-job comics, and I'll get into why I titled it that in a minute. But first, we have Shel Presto, Russ Leach, and Mr. Ronnie Gunter here, Crimson Owl Comics. Shel, first of all, I guess, how's that Kickstarter going?
The Kickstarter is going great. I'm working on the stuff for the third stretch goal already. So that's pretty cool. It looks like we're gonna hit that. I hope we do. So there's gonna add an extra short story and an extra piece of art if that hits. So I'm already 75% of the way done the art just in case. But that's we're doing an RPG zine. It's called Dauntless. We're doing it on Kickstarter right now. It's live, and I'm sure Marshall put a link in the description, or you can just search Dauntless on Kickstarter. So if you need more occult villains and criminal masterminds for your current RPG, you can check that out. Otherwise, I'm heroicadventurefiction.com, all one word, no spaces, or ascensionepoch.com, or Shel Presto on a ton of social media.
Awesome. Yeah, the link is in the description. It's left over from the last episode.
Thank you.
Which also, I just want to say, like, that last episode, like view-wise and comment-wise went really well. Like, people really like that. So if anybody's interested in public domain stuff, Shel and her husband were on, and it was a really cool show. We really dug deep into it. So yeah, definitely check that out. Ronnie, what's up, man? Where can people find you?
My name is Ronnie Gunter. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as Crimson Owl Comics.
Awesome.
And you can watch my show Sunday with my two co-hosts, Fogbreaker Studios and Robert Ogre, Comics Della Morte, where we talk about horror comics.
And it seems like a lot of fun. I still haven't gotten a chance to get through that video, but I really want to. Just from the beginning, I was like, this is going to be good. And Russ, who are you and where can we find you?
I'm Russ Leach. I'm Comic Book Black Belt on YouTube. You can pick me up at russleach.com, comicbookblackbelt.com, or over at my books website, onlydeathcansavus.com, where you can sign up for the email subscription list. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I'm also part of a live stream with Fway Storm on a Monday night or Monday afternoon in the States. Is It Just Us? And we just rant and do a book review. So, and I have to say that the book review that Ronnie's been doing are very good, very enjoyable.
Thank you. Going to be talking about your book this Sunday.
Oh,
watch out. So that's awesome. Yeah, I definitely recommend that show as well with our buddy Fway, also known as Lucifer these days. Yes, he's the only Lucifer I know and love. So not so much. But that being said, speaking about Lucifer, now I'm trying to bring up this comment I got on YouTube, which is I should have been prepared here, but I know I can get to it really quick. Oh, maybe I can't get to it as quick as I thought. Anyways, I got a comment this morning, actually, and that's kind of what spurred this whole thing. Sorry, I'm still trying to find it a little bit. I think I might be able to. No. Okay. Oh, yeah, here it is. I'm not saying who it is, but I've made 38 comics, and I never use those goddamn books. I write words and freestyle. And he's referring to my starting your comic video that is kind of the driver for all the most of the growth here on my YouTube channel. And I mentioned how to draw the Marvel way, and I think Scott McCloud's book and some other books, and so that's what he's referring to. But I had a nice comment back to him, because the thing is I was actually thinking about that same thing yesterday to a certain degree, like how much like I almost wonder if most of us would be better off not really seeking learning so much, like as we a lot of times do. Um, you know, I'm not saying that learning is bad at all because I love learning. I love reading books about creative processes. I mean, right now I'm re-listening to story arcs by K.M. Weiland, really great book on writing characters and just writing stories in general. And there's a lot of stuff I take in, but I wonder sometimes if I spent that time actually doing the thing.
Mhm.
First of all, it would be more efficient. Second of all, I would learn a lot of the stuff anyways, just by doing. And third, I wouldn't have some of the rules kind of the quote unquote traditional rules kind of holding me back to the point where I might actually innovate some things, without even realizing it. I might find new ways to do things that other people haven't thought of that might actually help, the help move the medium a little bit. Not that the medium's broken. I love the medium of comic books. Um, you know, there is something to be said for that kind of way. At the same time, there are certain things I've learned by books that have revolutionized the way I've done things too. So I personally could never get away from learning from books and things like that. I love it. But sometimes I do wonder if I spend too much time, doing that kind of thing, and if it would be better off if I just did it more. What do you guys think about that? Anybody want to chime in on that?
Yeah. No, you
Russ,
go.
go for it. All right. It's funny because the way you worded the question before was kind of like, what are the lies we tell ourselves or the misconceptions? And as soon as you say something like that, like an explosion of experiences came to my head because I
And
think
one second, Shell, just to clarify for anybody who's wondering what she's talking about, we have a prompted chat in the Discord every day, a daily prompt chat. And today I put in this question about, what are the lies we tell ourselves or misbeliefs we tell ourselves sometimes as creative people, and how do we kind of get over them? So just wanted to clarify that's what she's talking about. Sorry, go ahead, Shell.
and it ties right into what you were just talking about. And I think a big one is that you tell yourself, if I just learn this thing, then I'll be successful. And I think, that's the crux of it. Like, if I just learn how to ink better, I'll be successful. People will notice my work. If I do Inktober all 31 days and I post a video or a piece of art every day, someone's going to notice. And the big truth of it is it doesn't matter what your skill level is right now. It doesn't matter, what platform you're using or anything like that. That's all a learning experience that you're going to get as you go. And things change is the other thing. Like if you pick up a book by Will Eisner or something, it's gonna say like you should ink because back then that's what you did to make things look good in print. Well, it's great to learn to ink, but we have the internet now, and print isn't as important, so you don't have to exactly do that. And I fully agree that you can get bogged down in thinking, I just need to do one more thing, or I just need to learn to do one more thing. And you just need to do. The learning happens as you're doing it. It's great to try to learn new things, but you should always be doing as you're learning.
Yeah. Spot on. I think in answer to that YouTube comment, well done. That person, well done. Just because you've done that doesn't mean that you can suggest that other people don't require those books. Everybody's got their own unique journey. I I would say that I'm very much a one for rules. I like to learn things and then break them, because then I know how I'm breaking them, what I'm doing, not just that I'm coming at it from ignorance. Also, no matter where you come from, whether you decide you're never going to use a book or some kind of source to learn from, or other people to learn from, you're going to be completely sealed off from other people and be your own creative process. No other influences or not. Nobody is born able to produce sequential art for a comic book. Nobody. You learn that. You learn that from all kinds of different places. You don't just learn it from books about sequential art. You learn it from watching films. You learn it from looking at the world around you. You understand it by the books that you read. It's so many things that come in, and the stories that you take in. There's so many aspects to doing sequential art, and that at the core is what comic books are. That's my personal opinion. Fway and I were talking about this the other day, and he was talking about having like whole whole pages and having prose. And I suggested to, because we were talking about not restricting people by having rules. You should be able to open up and let your creativity rule. And there does come a point where something like that stops being a comic book and becomes a book, a picture book, a book with prose and pictures, which is a different thing. So although I don't have an issue with punctuating sequential art with that kind of thing, I think the core of a comic is sequential art, and doing sequential art requires you to understand certain aspects of visual storytelling. Now, nobody is born knowing how to do that. You've got to find it out from somewhere. So whether it's the books that your YouTube friend didn't like you using in your video, or whether it's just by taking in cinema, prose, novels, cartoons, the world around you, whatever it is, you have to learn certain things in order to make it work in a comic book. And you can be as hugely creative as you like and push the medium as far as you want, but the bottom line for me is sequential art. If it's not sequential art, it's not a comic. There you go. So you've got to open yourself up to learn from different things. And I'm very impressed if that particular creator didn't need any of the books that you suggested in your video, but managed to provide a solid story, a sequential story process within their books, then I'm super impressed. But that doesn't mean that everybody's going to learn like that. And I think it's important. I'm a stickler for the rules. It's probably just because I'm old, but I like being able to know how things work before I take them apart. That's the wrong way. That's the wrong analogy. I like to know the ways of building, okay, before I build it differently. Okay, so I need to understand how anatomy works before I can put it into a Ben 10 cartoon and make the Ben 10 cartoon kind of work with your eyes and brain rather than just it looking like wibbly wobbly arms and legs. So I think there's always a process of learning to be involved, and it doesn't matter where you get it from. Your creativity can shine through that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, one thing too is there's a lot of things in kind of what you just said. One thing is, even if this person, said, and this isn't somebody I know or anything, this is probably the first time this person's ever commented on my channel. I don't know who it is. But even, if this person did not read any books or whatever, if they've read a comic, they've learned the craft to a certain degree.
Exactly. Yeah.
Observation is huge. That being said, right now I'm going through the process of beginning to write my glyph comic. Beginning again. I've been writing this thing for like 10 years. But the thing that I've written a few comics now. This is before I came at it. I've never written a comic. This was literally the first comic I made was a glyph mini comic. But as I've now gone for a bunch of years and written a few comics, short and long, now I've come to realize this I know, this I don't know. The stories are falling short in certain places. Why? Things like that. And I've done a lot of reading on how to write, and I still, even with on the job practice, I still feel like I fall so short and I'm such a novice at writing, and I value the books I've read so much. So it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of things that I just would not ever, I feel like I would not get just from writing. I would never understand just from writing and not learning. That being said, there's so much to writing. Like, you think, like, comics is there's a huge learning curve to comics because there's so much that truly goes into it, especially if you read a book like, Scott McCloud's like Understanding Comics or Making Comics. There's so much you don't even realize that goes into this thing. Writing is just like that, writing a good story. I'm not talking about, like, I could write a million stories. I've been writing since I was in, probably nursery school, at some point, or maybe not nursery school because I didn't know how to write then. But, I've been writing, little stupid stories forever, to a certain degree. But, did they have, a good character? Like, were they stories that is worthy kind of to present to the world? I don't know. Like, is it something that people would enjoy? Is it something that even I would enjoy? Like, there's so many aspects to it that boggle my mind. And so now, even though I've read a bunch of books now and done some writing on writing stories, I still get, it's like I've taken in all this information. So I almost have the opposite problem where I get stuck on the information though. So it's kind of this whole back and forth thing. Like, sometimes I'll try to start writing, but I'll be like, okay, but I have to remember this plot structure thing. And I have to remember this is how character arcs work. And I have to make sure I have this piece and that piece, or else the story's not going to work. And then that paralyzes me, So there is this whole thing of like, you got to sometimes just do it, and hope that some of the lessons you learn translate to what you're doing, Denny, you guys find that kind of thing?
There's no doubt you should just get on and do, because otherwise you'll never progress.
Yeah.
I was going to say too, especially with writing books, I actually have an entire video in which I talk with sci-fi author Alexander Helene about how we don't like a lot of writing books. But the thing with writing books is that, or any book at all, be it like Stephen King's book on writing or, How to Make Comics the Marvel Way, the people that write those books are giving you their particular keys to success, or what they think is the most important things that you can learn. But the thing is, there's a huge element of luck to, like, part of it is luck and part of it is persistence. And you kind of have to have both. But you have to be persistent to have a moment where you can have luck. But everyone that writes a book is trying to give you the best information that they have, that they use for success. So the key is to try to take what you like and discard what doesn't feel right to you, because there's any number of combinations. And it could be really confusing too, because you can read two books that tell you entirely different things. Some books will tell you always use a 3-plot structure and always have, this particular kind of character arc. And then you could read one that says right from the middle, and you're starting, at the top of the arc and then like going back down to the bottom or something. And it's not that either one of them is wrong. It's just one of them's going to be right for you, and you have to experiment. And that's why you kind of always have to be learning as you do, because you're not going to figure out which one works for you until you do it. But something probably will work. So if something doesn't feel right, that may mean you need to expose yourself to more things.
Yeah. I would chime in specifically on to underpin your argument, specifically on Draw the Marvel Way, the key word in that title is Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
It was how to draw for Marvel. I would suggest that particular book, out of all of the how to draw comics books, transcends comics to a degree because of some of the very basic exercises it has in it that are brilliant. But outside of that, the dynamics of how you draw a super person, a figure, and all that kind of stuff and composition was very much aimed at Marvel at the time. In fact, if you look at Marvel now, it probably doesn't it probably doesn't resound very well with a lot of the art that's coming out of Marvel at the moment. That you've got two kinds of art coming out of the mainstream modern comics. Either you've got art that looks like it should never be touched because it's so damn good, but doesn't tell the story as well, or you've got stuff that looks like it should be in the handbook while you're on a plane needing to know where the escape aisle is. So you know, I know that's very harsh, but I think it's true. I think you've got two types of art going on, and it's that middle way that the Bronze Age had. I'm going to bang on about it again. Sorry, boring. Was this way of telling stories and being dynamic, and so there is that aspect of, well, what's my target? And you're right. What you've got to do is you've got to look at the options that are available to you, use them in a way that works for you, and see what the final outcome is. And if it ticks enough boxes as far as making other people interested, because that's your end point is to tell stories to people. And if people aren't either getting what you're getting at, they can't read or understand your sequential art, then you're not telling a story. It's just a mess. But as long as you hit those tick boxes of people going, yeah, I like this, or that's resounding with me, or I understand that, then you're getting somewhere. So you should just carry on, keep doing that, refining your process and taking all those elements that you were talking about into account.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's kind of the way about it. And you know, I really do value the actual doing of it. I've mentioned this before, but our bunny Len Jennings came up with this kind of slogan, you know, making something. I think it goes, making comics, not excuses. And I can't get away from that. Like it's so true. I like what Allison here says. She says, I tend to use books and YouTube videos to get an idea for a technique, but then I practice it, which I think that's it. You know, it kind of reminds me, and that's some of the stuff that I think Russ was saying too, and Shell, and you know, it reminds me of like old kung fu movies, like I will try your style, like, but it's so true. Like, you know, even if it's just used as a jumping off point, you know, it's worth finding that learning. But you know, if you don't combine that learning with doing, you're going to be lost. And you're not actually, you know, a comic creator. You're not actually a writer if you don't actually, you know, do it. You know, it even reminds me of, you know, a scripture, you know, bringing my faith into this. There's always stuff with my faith that kind of brings it in. And obviously this show isn't about faith necessarily, but, you know, there's a scripture that says, you know, faith without works is dead, you know, and it's like, I believe in God, but if I don't actually do the things that are prescribed, like, what does that even matter? You know? So, you know, it's really a pretty universal thing, this kind of working it out, you know, on the page type of thing. And yeah, I don't know. Granny, what about you? What do you think about this kind of idea of kind of on the job training with comics?
It's definitely something that needs to be done because, like you guys were saying, no one could jump in and just draw from the bat, because we all have to learn our own style and our own techniques. And there's so many different types of genres out there, you know, with the superheroes, with the romance, and with the horror comics. Each comic genre, you know, has their own special style. You know, with the superheroes, you need to make them like muscular in a certain way. With the horror comics, you need to focus on trying to make some scenes that are like very like spooky and thrilling, that you're going to want the reader to like get terrified in it as they turn the next page to see what the monster is. So you really got to learn and just sit down and practice.
Doing just repetition is the mother of perfection, and you're never going to get perfection, and that's good because you don't want it, but you want to drive towards a way of doing things that you feel is telling the story that you're trying to tell. And it doesn't matter if we're exclusively writers or artists. In the comic book environment, we're all storytellers. So if you team up with a writer and you're a penciler or inker, okay, you're working together on that story. And sequential art you're an actor and you're the art director. When you're the sequential artist, you're both. And the key grip and the coffee man and everything else, and the writer is like the director and the producer and obviously the writer, and between you create a story. So you're all driving to tell a story, and if you don't practice that art in whatever form that takes and whatever style you decide and whatever works for you, if you don't practice that, then the storytelling will be lost. And that's the point. It's the whole point of everything we do. Telling stories.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too. I'm also reminded of the early days of comics when the genre was being formed from the dust, and this whole thing, like if you've read there's different books, but one book that I really love is, I think it was 10 Cent Plague, really good book, about kind of the beginning of comics and how it came to be. And then it eventually gets into, the whole comics code and how that came about. And it ends up becoming a lot more political. But I love the kind of the earlier part of the book because it really gets into like how all this started and the first creators who did this. And when it first started, it was, it was kind of adapting comic strips to a different format, a magazine type of format. And eventually they started doing original stories that weren't, basically taken right from comic strips. And this comes out of a certain era where, artists would clamor to get any job, which I guess that might be every era, but but there was a certain disparity at this point where advertising art, people who did art and advertising weren't really finding much work, and so they kind of came to comics sometimes, and they found if they could churn out pages, they could make a living. But at the same time, these are the first people who made comics, and some of them did really care about the craft. We mentioned Will Eisner; he was in there, kind of a little bit later, but he was kind of in there pretty early, and a big driver of kind of the craft becoming what it has become. And the thing is, it's interesting because we talk about copying other people's styles or this kind of thing, all these different techniques that might sometimes be frowned upon from a novice who might not really understand how creativity actually tends to work. But they were just looking over each other's shoulders. None of them knew what to do. They didn't. A lot of them were just like figuring it out as they go. I mean, at that point, thought bubbles, they were trying to figure out how do I convey thoughts on a comic book page? Like, how do I convey whispering on a comic book page? They didn't even know to use word balloons necessarily at first. Like, they had to figure all this stuff out. How do I lay out a page? Should I, pan? Like, they didn't even necessarily fully understand how to use panels and stuff. Like they were literally just figuring it out and looking over each other's shoulders and literally stealing from each other every possible technique they could steal, and eventually it became the comic book form. So, taking this approach where you freestyle your writing and you just do it, that is kind of the traditional way how this whole thing was figured out in the first place. So there is, at the same time as I love to learn and I do want to, kind of stand on the shoulders of giants, because why do all that work, when it's already been done? At the same time, there is something to be said for just going at it ignorantly, making comics on cave walls and figuring out new things and innovating. So I kind of applaud both methods. I think there was a bit of kind of aggression with that comment, which I think, so, I respond to that too, well, but at the same time, just because something comes off that way doesn't mean you can't kind of build from it as well. So I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts on that whole thing.
It's
what
the
do you guys
internet.
think about the idea,
Yeah.
the opportunity for innovation when you're kind of freestyling a little bit with your art form? Anybody?
Yeah, I just stick to the rules because I like it.
Well, I think there's definitely something for that too. I mean, I don't know, like rules were developed and kind of polished for a reason, and things work for a reason. And through all that hard work of trying to innovate and figure this thing out, you come to things that are very helpful and make the story work. So I totally respect that. And that's where I tend to come from the most part.
It's evolution, isn't it? Like you say, standing on the shoulders of giants, these comic book conceits have been created because they work, because in order to tell the story, not necessarily because they work in a more general format, but because they work in that particular environment. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with letting loose. We built all these rules up during the 70s and 60s, 70s and 80s, and then the 90s broke them anyway. So, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And my comment was mildly in jest. I like certain aspects of traditional comic book format, and I tend to use those, but I'm not beyond jumping out of them if it means it's going to tell a story better. And nobody should be. Everybody should be able to just, engage in that constant evolution of comics. But there are just certain things that work, and it doesn't matter what the format. It doesn't matter whether it's film, whether it's television, whether it's playing football, whether it's packing boxes. What you're going to do is you're going to find certain shortcuts, certain techniques that just work no matter what you're doing. And that's why there's always going to be these certain aspects to sequential art and comic books that will always remain because they work in the environment.
I think another important thing to think about as far as book learning versus doing goes too is that you kind of have a concept of active learning versus passive learning. And there's only if you can work on like a handful of things at a time actively, that's kind of amazing. I'm the sort of person where I can maybe be working on two things. Like I could tell myself I need to improve this, and I know I need to improve this every time I draw, like maybe female figure or men's shoulders or something. And when I'm drawing, I can be actively thinking I need to work on that. But generally, I can only work on like one or two things at a time, and that's active learning. Or even if you're saying, well, I'm going to do a comic and there's going to be a big fight scene, but I have to have like 2 pages of the characters fighting to ramp it up. You don't have active learning on the fight scene yet because you're not drawing it yet. That's and you can always be passive learning from a book because you're not going to absorb everything the first time you read it.
Yep.
So I think it's important to think like, well, I can't draw the big fight scene today, but I can read a book on drawing fight scenes today, and I can, still be passively learning that, so that when I get to those pages, I'll be a little more prepared. And if you read the same book a couple times or the same section a couple times, that's going to ramp you up and make those pages all the better, because you had knowledge going in, and you didn't have to waste active drawing time away from what's important to you today, which may be those pages working up to it. So you're actively working on back and forth and dialogue for those couple pages, but you're using books to get ready for the next step.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Nailed
Knowledge
it.
is
Yeah.
power.
There's only so much passive learning you can do.
Mhm.
You have to actively get on it. But
But
there's
the passive
certain
learning is important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It is. There's gradients, isn't there? So, like for instance, you have a particular style that you have for your art, but underneath it, you have to underpin it with the knowledge of, say, figure drawing, and you can. So, as far as comic book art is concerned, and production, going away and drawing figures from real life is passive learning. But you're still actively doing something. So there's a big gradation of what you can and can't do in order to make the page work at the end of the day, whether it's reading a book or whether it's just practicing something else, with a pencil. So yeah.
Awesome. There's a ton of great comments in the comments in the chat. And unfortunately, I can't get to them because I have to get going. But RBT brings up Windsor McKay and that he, even in 1905, he was experimenting a lot, and totally true. One of the fathers of what we do in art was. And I don't know, there's so much good stuff to learn from. Personally, I get kind of addicted with learning anyways. I love looking at the past and seeing what the methods were, and sometimes I find innovative things to do that we have forgotten as well, which I think is pretty interesting. So, that being said, I do have to kind of cut this off here. Let's go around the room. Ronnie, where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as Crimson Owl Comics.
Awesome. And Russ, what about you?
I always admire that you can be so direct. Crimson Owl Comics, you can get me everywhere. And then I'll just reel off a whole bunch of stuff and people have got to remember it. You can find me on YouTube as Comic Book Black Belt. You can pick me up as russleach.com, comicbookblackbelt.com at my websites, or at my book website, onlydeathcansavus.com. You can sign up for the email registration there. I'm on the usual places on social media, and at the moment, while things are like they are and going into my book, I'm doing 2 or 3 live streams a week on YouTube of live inking and penciling. So join me there.
Awesome. Shell, what about you?
Shell Presto on most social media. You can also search for that on YouTube for my channel, and I'll keep it just to the Dauntless Kickstarters going on right now.
Awesome. And that link is in the description, and so are the links for everybody else here. And you guys know where to find me, donkeyjawprojects.com and Marsh Comics on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. And other than that, had a really good time hanging out with you guys. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out. Thanks for everybody in the chat and people watching on the replay. And with that being said, we will talk to you on the next one.
Peace.